You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 29th of August, 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Israel has launched the largest military attack on the West Bank in decades. Ukraine is trying to persuade the US to get behind its efforts to penetrate more Russian territory. And the Taliban is passing new laws to further silence women. I'm Georgina Godwin. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you live from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guests are William Patey and Alex von Tunzelmann, who is a woman that neither the Taliban nor anyone else can shut up easily, are here to discuss the day's big stories, with news from the Middle East to Ukraine, Afghanistan to China, and a flying visit to Venice and Copenhagen too. Do stay tuned. All that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. Well, let me introduce you to my guests. They are Sir William Patey, a former British diplomat. He served as ambassador to Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and the political consultant and historian, author and screenwriter Alex von Tunzelmann. It's a glorious day here in London, and it seems as if we're still in the height of summer. Not as hot here as it will be in Spain, however, William. I understand that's where you're off to next.
Yes, off to next week to celebrate my son's 37th birthday. So we're off to a sort of small part of a valley in Spain, the Girona Valley, which is halfway between Valencia and Alicante.
Very nice. And Alex, you're also flying into the heat. What's your itinerary in California?
Yes, very excited to be going over there. Well, I mean, like many people throughout the pandemic, my husband and I saved up lots of air miles. And so now we sort of can't spend them. I mean, you know, you get into this position where you can't get rid of them. So I'm afraid we are rather environmentally, disrespectfully jetting off on the long haul. And yes, my husband's a very big baseball fan, so he's extremely keen to see the Los Angeles Dodgers in their stadium. I shall not be doing that. I shall be going to a spa.
Well, both trips sound amazing. And William, I can understand why you're not going to the area where your political expertise lies, like you want a holiday. But obviously, your USP is the Middle East. And it's there that I'd like to start today's programme with the largest assault by Israel on the occupied West Bank in decades. I wonder if you can tell us what's been going on over the last 24 hours or so.
Well, I mean, the Israelis, under the guise of a counter-terrorism operation, have basically invaded the parts of Gaza that they weren't, parts of the West Bank that they weren't already in charge of. I mean, that's been a feature while the Gaza war has been going on. The very aggressive settlers have been expanding their territory within the West Bank, and the IDF have been essentially standing aside or indeed supporting them. But you only have to take my word for it. The head of Shin Bet, the Israeli internal security, has described what the settlers have been doing as terrorism, basically terrorising Palestinians out of their land. And I think it's a land grab. I think it's part of the agenda of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, what I'd call the extremists in the Israeli government, who have an agenda to take over the whole of the lands of Judea and Samaria. I think that's essentially what we're seeing as part of that broader agenda.
Yeah, but this is not settler violence. This is the IDF.
No, this is the IDF, and I don't doubt for some moment that there are some Hamas sympathisers, Hamas fighters wanting to mount attacks. I don't dispute that, but the question is, the way they're going about it, does that further this agenda, further the settler agenda, or enhance Israeli security? I think people like the head of Shin Bet and Mossad do not think it does enhance Israeli security.
Now, of course, the US and others are continuing to push for a ceasefire in Gaza. There's a particular reason why Israel might finally agree to it. There's a polio outbreak in Gaza, the first in 25 years. If it isn't contained immediately, it could spread to Israel. Do you think that disease might succeed where negotiation hasn't?
Well, we've heard noises from Netanyahu today that he might take that seriously, but I feel like we've heard these noises before on various other grounds that were also very pressing, issues of famine and so forth. And then, of course, it hasn't happened. So I'm not actually holding out huge hope that this will be the end of it, or even, more than potentially some sort of temporary allowance for some workers to go in, set up maybe some vaccination centres or something like this. But I mean, that would not be the same at all as a ceasefire.
What do you think, William?
I think I agree with that. I think the extremists on both sides, and I count Netanyahu as one of the extremists and Yahya Sinwar on the other side at the extremists, they're not really interested in a ceasefire. For Hamas, the only ceasefire they will accept is one where they're still in place and he survives. Survival is victory for them. The Israelis have rejected the UN Security Council plan, the Biden plan, introducing new conditions like they have to be in control of the Egyptian-Gaza border. So each side, when there's a prospect of the other side agreeing, seem to introduce other conditions. So I'm not hopeful.
And polio, will that make a difference?
Well, I mean, I think the UN will try and vaccinate come what may. I mean, they're not going to try and allow, so they'll make do. That as is always the case, and they may get laissez-passer from the IDF in various places. But it could be the Israeli temporary ceasefire may be what they want. They'll have a ceasefire. They'll remain in place in Gaza and on the border with Egypt. So they'll get what they want actually from it. They'll still be in place. So a temporary ceasefire kind of suits them. I'd be surprised if Hamas agree to it.
Israel, of course, is fighting on its northern front too against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, residents of Beirut are turning to humour as a coping mechanism. There's a new website called jadarsot.com. It asks residents to rate sonic booms, rather like other comparison websites such as TripAdvisor. Alex, what have people been saying?
Well, I have to say, I mean, this is, obviously an incredibly serious subject. I have found this quite delightful and a bit of a breath of fresh air. Love some Lebanese humour. So we've had some reviews. Basically, yes, some of them sort of picking up on the current TikTok trend. Yes, that sonic boom, very cutesy, very demure, very mindful, we've heard. We've had some others. Loke caught me off guard, 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10, that was a good one from the Mountain Lebanon Governorate. A rather rude one, I'm afraid, 3 out of 10. Weak AF, my farts cause more damage. So I'm afraid some of them are rather critical. 4 out of 10, I thought my dad fell off the stairs. I went to check on him.
Dear.
So a bit of a variation.
William, how have you found humour and how useful has it been when trying to cope with living in a conflict zone? Because you've been in many. Yes,
I mean, you have to be a little bit careful. I mean, the Lebanese have been living with war since the 70s, civil war. So the Lebanese are pretty good at the black humour. It's their way, it's their survival. I have found, actually, in my time in the Middle East, humour is a door opener. The Arabs love a joke, so they do. But when horrible things are happening around you, sometimes it's the only way to sort of prevent yourself from sinking into a depth of despair.
Well, of course, Ukrainians have long used humour as a coping mechanism. Even the president joins in. This week, Volodymyr Zelensky said that he would present US President Joe Biden with a plan for victory during a meeting in September, adding that he keeps bringing up red lines that Ukraine's Western allies have imposed on the use of weapons inside territory. They don't want to talk about it, and I keep bringing it up, Zelensky quipped. The Olympics are over, but ping pong is still there. Well, Alex, Zelensky seems to have a wonderful ability to tap into the zeitgeist. His comments are usually on point. They get to the heart of the matter, but he also appeals to popular culture. How has his grasp of being able to talk to the widest possible denominator that's managed to rouse worldwide support, how's he managed to do that?
I think it's fascinating to watch, isn't it? And I mean, the man is, of course, a professional comedian. I mean, he was a comedian and an actor. And, when all of this started, I think there's a lot of people who didn't take those skills terribly seriously and probably underrated him quite significantly. But actually, those communication skills he has, I think, have proven to be enormously important and really valuable. And obviously, at some level, he's a deeply serious man. I mean, at this point, surely nobody doubts that. But this lightness of touch, this ability to communicate, I think has been highly effective. And I think it's been very effective, actually, in spreading and keeping alive the Ukrainian cause outside Ukraine as well. He obviously speaks brilliantly in English too. And I think that's been tremendously helpful, actually, for the global awareness of what's happening.
William, what is his plan that he's pushing to the US?
Well, I think he's trying to get the US agreement to allow him to use longer-range missiles to strike at Russian military targets that are supplying the Russian invasion, supporting the Russian invasion into Ukraine. That's what he'd like. He'd also, he'd also like to prepare for the day when when a negotiation will take place. At some point, this war will stop, and I think that's what he'll want understanding of that. He won't want pressure to withdraw from the Russian territory they've taken, except as part of a negotiation, mutual withdrawal. I mean, I think it's a very smart move on his part. I mean, as Alex says, he's a brilliant communicator. He's led the Ukrainian people spectacularly. He's also very brave. I'm surprised more comedians are not going into politics after his example. Some people may say we've had enough comedians in politics, but none of them were professional comedians.
Absolutely. But I mean, I wonder what you both think what happens come November if there is a change in administration. Is Ukraine effectively screwed?
Well, I mean, Trump has been saying I'll end the war tomorrow. I think Zelensky and the Ukrainians have put themselves in a better position, because ending the war tomorrow for Trump was freezing the lines as they were. We'll have a peace, and the Russians will just keep what they've already taken. And that would be unacceptable, of course, to the Ukrainians. But they might have no choice if American support was withdrawn. I think the Europeans would continue to support. But now taking this Russian territory, there is a negotiation to be had, but they certainly will be keeping their fingers crossed that Kamala Harris wins the presidency, because Trump's idea of a settlement is not one that would appeal to any Ukrainian.
And Alex, it seems that both the UK and France are also pressurising Washington to reconsider its opposition to Kyiv firing deeper into Russia. Of course, Europe has more to lose. Why is the ultimate decision down to Washington, though?
Well, they are still the biggest game in town. I mean, which of course is the worry. If the administration does change in November, that the situation could be very different. But, I think it's still incredibly important. I mean, also, of course, the UK and France would much rather act with the US than against it. I mean, nobody wants to sort of create a disagreement here. It'd be much better to have a united front. And I think it's been very interesting also to watch Washington's conduct throughout this war in Ukraine. And I think they've been generally cautious, but actually mostly quite sensibly so, and prepared to shift slowly when they've needed to. It will be interesting to see if and when they shift on this. I mean, obviously the timing is so crucial with US domestic politics. It would be amazing for Biden to have some kind of victory before the election to present something to the American people. Of course, he's not standing now, but nonetheless, for the Democrats, that would obviously be some sort of win. And it would also reduce the risk of a Trump presidency making an agreement that was far more favourable to Russia.
Yeah. I think it's a NATO thing as well. I mean, we're all in this together, NATO. And of course, the last thing we want is Russia to be able to exploit differences between different NATO countries. So moving in lockstep is a sensible thing to do, even although the Americans may seem to have the veto. But it's important that the Americans agree.
And how is Putin dealing with this attack on his territory?
Well, he seems to have kind of been rather caught off guard, and it's not being talked about much in the Russian media. Making arrangements for the 100,000 people who've been displaced is what's covered. So he seems to be virtually ignoring it. He hasn't done, interestingly, he hasn't tried to rally the Russian people against this attack on its territory. He hasn't done that, which is interesting, because that would have been one way of dealing with it.
And another way, of course, that he deals with criticism is by silencing any voices who might speak out. And, of course, this isn't new amongst authoritarian leaders and hardliners around the world. But Afghanistan, under the Taliban, already a repressive regime, has just stepped this up even further. Alex, the Taliban published a host of new vice and virtue laws, which state that women must completely veil their bodies, including their faces, in thick clothing at all times in public to avoid leading men into temptation and vice. I wonder if you can tell us what else is contained within these new laws to protect these poor men who clearly can't resist on their own.
I mean, there's they're extraordinarily tight new laws. Not only are women's bodies and faces criminalised, but actually also their voices. The voices can also be instruments of vice and must not be heard in public. Women must not be heard singing or reading aloud, even from inside their houses. Do it too loudly and you're in trouble. There are, it would be said, also some restrictions on men. Men have to cover their bodies from their navels to their knees, outside their home at least. But the women are getting the brunt of this. Women are not allowed to look directly at men they're not related to by blood or marriage. Taxi drivers who agree to drive a woman alone without a male escort will be punished. And I mean, it seems very vague what is going to happen in that the idea is that women and girls who do not comply with these laws in some way can be detained and punished in a manner deemed appropriate by Taliban officials.
William, you were the British ambassador to Afghanistan. What is the reasoning behind this? And from your own experience, how do you think citizens, both men and women, survive in this environment?
Well, they're very adaptable people. Many of them will leave. A lot of the women who were educated during the 20 years we were there, the young girls, there are secret schools going on. To be a woman, to live anyway at all, you've got to do it secretly and undercover. And many of their fathers and brothers will support them, but it looks like the hardline leaders are doubling down, because the strategy up to now has been to try and withhold recognition of the Taliban, withhold full development assistance, in order to coax them to lift the restrictions on women and lift the restrictions on female education. They've doubled down. Whether this can survive or not, they've removed 50% of the population out of the economy. How you can run a country like this for a period of time, it strikes me as impossible. It's ironic at the time when the only other country that put these similar restrictions on women have got rid of, Saudi Arabia, have got rid of their religious police, the Mutawa. They've got rid of all the restrictions. So the Taliban are out there as a complete outlier.
But with your experience in the region, why? Why is this happening? Why are they so afraid of women?
I think they're afraid because these are not very well educated people. They're threatened by the sorts of freedoms that we all take for granted. How do you impose the sort of control that they impose? They are adopting. This is not Islam. This is Pathan culture. This is tribal elders, villagers, taking control of a whole country. This is how you would run a village, with a head man ruling the roost, and they're trying to run a country like that. I don't think they can run a country like this, but it will implode at some point. But how much suffering the women have got to, how long their suffering will go on before it does, it's hard to tell.
Alex, our mutual friend Lucy Hanna's just edited a book that will be published in a couple of weeks. It's called My Dear Kabul. So in August 2021, a women's creative writing group in Afghanistan shared news of political turmoil and the fall of Kabul. And these women were in the process of publishing a short story collection. It's called My Pen is the Wing of a Bird. It's out now. It's very good. When their world was turned upside down by the Taliban. So they stayed connected via WhatsApp messages. They established a lifeline. It was a vital space to keep their creativity alive, to support each other, to bear witness to the events unfolding around them. So My Dear Kabul is their story. It's a collective diary of a year living under the Taliban. So this is one way in that women have a voice. What other ways are the oppressed women of the country fighting back? And I mean, of course, when you're in the country, it's very difficult, but the diaspora is certainly stepping up.
They certainly are. I mean, and plenty of people are incredibly vocal about this. And, as you say, I mean, lots of these women were educated over the last 20 years and certainly do not lack the kind of, loquacity to speak out and the power to do so. But it's incredibly difficult for women within the country. I mean, within there seems to me that there's almost no scope for resisting this. I mean, the Taliban have responded quite defensively to criticism of this internationally. They've been saying, we won't be stopped from doing this by you. We won't be, kind of intimidated out of doing this very important laws that we're doing. And they've said also, well, these won't be enforced very harshly. We intend to punish them, I quote, gently, with, sort of advice and encouragement. I mean, we'll see, I think, what happens on that score. But, I mean, it seems to me that it's an incredible risk for women at the moment. But, I mean, what we've seen with women in most repressive societies is, of course, you cannot actually stop a human mind. You know that actually, of course, people's resistance will continue on some level. But I mean, I rather hope from their point of view that the implosion you mentioned happens sooner rather than later.
It's very difficult because there are lots of educated Afghan women running illegal schools as undercover schools. I know the BBC are running a programme and beaming it, and it's very difficult for the Taliban to stop that happening. So, that will continue, but at great risk, of course, to the women inside Afghanistan who are running these schools.
William, Kamala Harris is coming under attack at the moment by Trump and the Republicans during her presidential campaign about the US's abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan. But of course, Britain did that too, and some Afghans who served Britain were left behind. Indeed, some are still there. How do you feel about this?
Well, I think it's ironic. I mean, it's not just ironic. It's completely ludicrous that Trump should be criticised. I mean, it was Trump who signed that deal with the Taliban, the Doha Agreement, which agreed to the withdrawal of US troops, i.e. NATO troops, in return for vague promises that the Taliban have not kept of a political dialogue with the government. So Trump signed an agreement that would have withdrawn the troops in May of the year they did withdraw. Biden extended it a bit. So Trump is the architect of the US withdrawal. How it happened, it wouldn't have been any better under him either. So I take Trump's criticism of this, it should be taken for what it is. Absolutely ludicrous, misplaced, and a complete lie.
What about Britain and the responsibility the country has to those people left behind?
Well, we tried to exercise that responsibility. I mean, Sir Laurie Bristow, who's the ambassador at the time, has written a very moving account of trying to get people out, and I think we got about 20,000 people out who were under direct threat, who'd worked for the British government. I chair a charity which was also active in getting young women out who were under threat. So I think, given the circumstances, I think we did what we could. The obligation we now have to them is to try and keep the pressure up on the Taliban to change, but there are limited levers we can pull, because the lever you can pull, economic levers, hurt the Afghan people as much as they hurt the Taliban, and they don't seem to be working. The Taliban's willingness to absorb economic pain seems unlimited.
So one can silence women by passing laws, one can prevent dissent by locking people up, but that relies on the person being a sentient adult. How do you force a child to be quiet? In China, a clip's gone viral which saw two women lock a crying toddler in an aeroplane toilet. Alex, are you across this story?
I mean, I've been reading it today and finding it so astonishing that one almost doesn't know where to start. So apparently this child, a 1-year-old toddler, was on the plane with her grandmother, which already seems like quite an extraordinary situation to entrust a toddler to a grandmother. But anyway, there she is. Was kicking off, as 1-year-olds might, having a sort of screaming fit. And the other passengers were very irritated by this, and clearly the grandmother wasn't really able to resolve it. These two women who were strangers to the family took the child, apparently with the grandmother's consent, to the bathroom, saying they were going to teach the kid a lesson, locked her in, and said she couldn't come out until she was quiet. I mean, it's kind of unimaginable that everybody sort of went along with this at the time, I think.
Quite extraordinary. I mean, William, you've got 2 kids. In your career, you must have had to have flown all over the world.
I flew to Australia and back with 2 kids under 4, 2.5, and I've also travelled as a businessman and had kids. You can get irritated, but you've got to be reasonable about this. I mean, I had somebody. My child was actually laughing and was in a happy state, and I had a businessman behind me saying, "Can you keep that child quiet?" I said, "No, I can change the nature of the noise. I can turn this happy laughter into crying, but I don't think you'd like that after." You just have to deal with people. I presume this was an internal Chinese flight, because I can't imagine that any sensible airline, any aircrew would have allowed that to happen. I mean,
you've got a long trip to California, though. How do you feel? I mean, should there be a child-free zone?
Well, some airlines now do this, of course. They do offer, you can pay extra for child-free seating. I mean, who knows what we think about that. I mean, personally, I do think children are part of life, and there's an extent to which you just have to deal with it, and that's fine. I do also think, though, that, if you are in charge of a child on a plane, for goodness sake, bringing an iPad and some headphones, I mean, because that's all you need.
You know what? Speaking of headphones, famously, George and Amal Clooney dealt with taking their 6-month-old twins on a transatlantic flight by giving everyone in their cabin noise-cancelling headphones. William, this story's some years ago now, but I understand you know the Clooney family. Are the twins now 7, particularly noisy?
7 and 8, they're very boisterous, but of course, since then, they've had a private jet for quite a lot of flying. So that's one way of dealing it. Give everyone earphones, or give a private jet. But you can also take your own earphones if you're worried about children's noises. I mean, for goodness sake.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not sure where the Clooneys were going on that trip, but there is a lot of other Hollywood royalty heading to Venice for the film festival this week. Alex, I know this is something you've been following. What would you be keen to see? Were you going to Venice?
Well, I would have missed it already, because last night I would have loved to see the Beetlejuice premiere.
Terrible reviews, though.
Of course it's got terrible reviews, but did you see the outfits? They were magnificent. I mean, to be honest, the original is quite chaotic. I mean, so I feel that's probably it. I mean, but in terms of more serious films, I would be really interested to see the new Pedro Almodovar films, his first in 3 years, I think. That's very exciting. And Alfonso Cuarón has made a TV series with Kate Blanchett and Kevin Kline, and the most extraordinary cast, and that's being premiered there as well, so on Apple TV. So I think there is some really interesting work there, as well as the attention-grabbing pieces.
William, are you much of a movie buff?
Oh, yes, I chair a film society. I'm honorary president of St Margaret's Film Society, but we can't afford to go to Venice. We'll be signing up for the London Film Festival when it comes, but we'll certainly want to see anything by Almodovar. I have to say, I love his women. The Almodovar films are always full of the strongest, feistiest women you could ever have. I love his films, the colour and everything. So I'm sure that it may come to the London Film Festival, but it'll certainly be on general release at some stage.
Yeah, well, of course, as well as the film festival, the Venice Biennale is also on at the moment. But if you don't feel like dealing with the crowds and you want a dose of contemporary art, you could always head to Copenhagen's Kunsthal Charlottenborg, where the 12th edition of Chart, the leading Nordic event for contemporary art, begins today. The renowned fair is focused on high quality and considered presentations, bringing together both established and new exhibitors from across the region and creating a single entry point into the best of the Nordic art scene. Well, ahead of the show, Monocle's Monica Lillis spoke to its director, Julie Quattrop-Silberman. She started by asking her to explain the inspiration behind Chart and its sister fair, Chart Architecture.
The fair turns 12 this year, and it's a non-profit organization that were established by 5 Danish galleries. And ever since the beginning, they have had this vision about creating this one entrance point towards the Nordic art scene. So Chart is actually only a Nordic art fair. We have galleries from all the Nordic countries. This year, having 36 galleries that all are invited to participate. And ever since the beginning, we have been placed at Charlottenborg, which is in the heart of Copenhagen. It's at an art institution, and then around the art institution, you have the Royal Academy of Fine Art. So every day we meet the new and the young upcoming artists, and this one time per year when the fair takes place, and the last weekend of August, we take over the 2 courtyards and the art institutions where we place all the galleries. And then at the Academy and one large room that they have, we have added for the past 4 years now, the Chart Book and Print Fair.
Why is it so important to showcase Nordic art to the world?
We have a smaller art scene within these Nordic countries. So if we work together, we become stronger. And I think it's inspiring for people from abroad to come and see the leading galleries and what is going on in the Nordics. And it's also a way of doing something else where we stick out a bit. There's so many art fairs around the world. So having a specific focus, I find that quite interesting. But being said, it's not just Nordic artists that we are showing, because when you're looking at all the galleries' profiles, they have artists, international artists from all over the world. So you get a really broad sense, but it's Nordic galleries, or at least galleries with connections to the Nordics.
This year's edition in particular focuses on new voices in the Nordics. And I wanted to get into that a little bit because when I was researching, I wasn't 100% sure whether that meant, new and upcoming voices or kind of new people that are doing groundbreaking work. So can you tell me why this is important, who's involved, and if there are any highlights?
Every year we need to put a new focus because our program should surround something that is new every year. And that's also because we have a huge program around the fair. We're not just an art fair. We kind of refer to ourselves as being an art event. So on top of having an art fair, we have a huge talks program, performance program, music programs, and different events going around at the courtyard. So basically a public program in order to drag in a larger audience. So this year, we decided to focus on new voices in the Nordics, and it's both like more emerging artists, but also artists that has, put focus on themselves. Maybe they're already kind of established, but a new highlight has been on their practice within the last couple of months. So one of the artists that I could highlight is an artist or a collaborative project between Standard, the gallery based in Oslo, and then Koy Nielsen from Vienna. And they actually made this project around Nina Bayer, this Danish artist that lives and works in Berlin. And they have created a large installation. I haven't even seen it yet, but she is an artist that's currently having several museums and art institution shows around the world at the moment, and also just one here a little north of Copenhagen. So she's what you could say, and she's not new because she's already an established artist, but there's a lot of focus on her right now. And then besides that, it's also newer artists, like newer emerging artists, and several of them, we have them participate in Tivoli, where we are also doing a Tivoli is this amusement park that's actually 180 years old. And for the past 2 years, we have been curating an exhibition with sculptures and art installation in this amusement park in order to bring more art out into the public space. And for that show, we have quite a lot of new voices, newer artists.
So I wanted to move on a little bit and talk about chart architecture, which is also celebrating a bit of a milestone this year with its 10th birthday. And sort of in a similar vein, like when I was researching this, it kind of said, chart likes to combine elements of art and architecture, and they're kind of the same vein, I guess. Let's start with what is chart architecture?
Well, chart architecture, as she said, is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. And it's based on a competition, an open call, where it used to be back in the days for students from the academy studying architecture. And this competition has been going on for 10 years now. Both for last year, we changed it so it was newly established architectural firms. But this year, as we turn 10 years, we want to do something new. And this is actually the first time we are only announcing one big winner project, one big pavilion. And the theme for this year were that we wanted to talk into new Nordic architecture, basically just another word for new Nordic architecture, and with a specific focus where we wanted them to challenge this white cube gallery space format, because we wanted the pavilion to contain this exhibition called Start Collecting with Chart that we can come back to if you want. So it was a matter of creating a more vibrant and new and rethink this white cube gallery space to present art in.
One of your main points is that you want to kind of unite the worlds of contemporary art and architecture. What does this mean, and how can we do this? Because I think maybe some people might say, these are two very different disciplines. How do we unite the two?
I think what we try to do, we try to create this one ecosystem of culture part, you could say. So we are both bringing in the art. Of course, art is our main focus. The art fair is the key point for us. But we want to create this combination of both design and architecture. We also have the book and print fair. So really have this ecosystem of the culture, contemporary art scene, and architecture is a part of that. And seeing how artists and architecture can collaborate, that's a focus we also put into our talks program. How can they even collaborate even more, be more inspired of one another in the building process, but also on the other way around, for artists to be inspired by architects. So for us, it's about creating this ecosystem of the culture contemporary scene at the moment.
That's Chart in Copenhagen, and that's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. A big thanks to my panellists today, Sir William Patey and Alex von Tunzelmann. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Sana Jamani. Our sound engineer was Sarah Nichol. I'm Georgina Godwin here in London, and the Monocle Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.